You probably tried learning something new, like juggling, playing the guitar, or attempting to speak a new language, and thought, wow, this feels like trying to swim upstream in a pool of honey. Yeah, learning new skills can feel that tough. But there's good news. Our brains are actually built for it. The trick is understanding how to work with your brain instead of against it. In this episode, we're diving into the science of learning, specifically how we acquire new skills. Whether it's nailing that guitar riff, perfecting a soccer move, or finally rolling your R's in Spanish, the way we learn these different skills isn't as random as it might seem. We'll explore why repetition, but the right kind of repetition, is key. Why learning a new habit can feel like trying to teach an elephant to dance, and how to make learning easier and more fun. Okay, let's start with the basics. What's actually happening in your brain when you learn something new? Whether you're mastering the guitar, picking up a new language, or trying not to trip over your own feet while learning a dance move, your brain is building neural connections. Think of these connections as little pathways between neurons. The more you practice a skill, the stronger these pathways get, like walking the same trail in the forest over and over until it becomes a well-worn path. But here's the kicker. Different types of skills are learned in different parts of the brain. For example, language learning. This taps into your brain's auditory processing and memory. You're constantly building connections related to sounds, grammar rules, and vocab. Learning an instrument. This one's a double whammy. It involves both motor control, because, you have to actually move your fingers or blow into that trumpet, and auditory processing, so you can hear if you're playing the right notes. Physical skills, for example, sports or dancing. These skills rely heavily on procedural memory, basically your brain's ability to remember and refine physical movements through repetition. Here's where it gets interesting. No matter what type of skill you're learning, one thing that remains key across the board is repetition. But not just any repetition, optimized repetition. This means you don't just keep repeating something endlessly in one go. You have to space out your practice. This is called spaced repetition, and it's basically the brain's way of saying, give me a break, then I'll come back stronger. Think of your brain as a sponge. It needs time to dry out between practice sessions to absorb more efficiently. We'll get into the details of this later on. You know what's even harder than learning something new? Unlearning something you've learned wrong. The brain is kind of like wet cement. Once it sets a pathway, it's tough to break it up and start again. This is why it's so crucial to get things right from the start. Here's how it works. When you repeat an action or piece of information, your brain strengthens those neural connections, kind of like laying down a superhighway for that specific task. But if you're practicing something the wrong way, like hitting the wrong notes on a piano or mispronouncing a word in a new language, your brain doesn't care. It's still building that neural highway, and the more you practice it wrong, the harder it is to tear down and rebuild with the correct information. So, why is unlearning so hard? The brain loves efficiency. Once it's built a habit or pathway, it doesn't want to waste energy trying to change it. Imagine you're taking the same route to work every day for years, and then suddenly someone tells you, actually, this whole time, you've been going the wrong way. Here's the new, correct route. Your first instinct is going to be, but I've always done it this way. That's basically your brain trying to save itself the hassle of relearning. A good example of this is in sports or physical skills. Let's say you've been practicing a tennis serve for months, but you've been holding the racket wrong. When a coach finally shows you the right grip, it feels awkward and frustrating at first. That's because your brain has already carved out a nice, comfy pathway for the wrong technique, and now you have to start breaking that down and building a new one from scratch. So, the takeaway? Get it right the first time and focus on accuracy before speed. As they say, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Now we're getting somewhere. You can finally strum a few chords on the guitar without your fingers rebelling. You've reached the point where you can perform the skill, but you still need to think about every move. It's not automatic yet, but you're making real progress. How to move forward. To transition from conscious competence to mastery, you need to structure your practice. This means focused, repetitive practice with feedback. For example, if you're learning a language, practice speaking with a tutor or native speaker. If you're learning a sport, work with a coach, or record yourself to spot mistakes. The key here is that you can perform the skill, but you still need to concentrate. Imagine you're cooking and need to follow a recipe step by step. You can make the dish, but you can't just wing it yet. That's where you are in this stage, doing it right, but with effort. Finally, you've reached the promised land, unconscious competence. This is where the skill becomes automatic, and you don't need to think about it anymore. You can play your favorite guitar song while chatting with a friend or multitask without messing up. It's like driving a car after years of practice. You can handle it on autopilot. How to get here? The only way to reach unconscious competence is consistent practice over time. At this point, it's all about repetition and maintaining the skill. This is where your brain has fully built those neural highways, and the skill becomes second nature. So, what's the takeaway here? Learning is a journey through stages, and each one requires a slightly different approach. When you're clueless, get exposure. When you're struggling, focus on deliberate, structured practice. And when you're finally getting the hang of it, keep practicing until it becomes second nature. Every expert you know, whether it's an athlete, a musician, or a polyglot, has gone through these stages. So, if you're stuck in stage 2, don't sweat it. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Now that we've walked through how learning works and the stages we go through, let's talk about the juicy part, how to actually hack the process and make learning more effective and less painful. Luckily, science has some pretty cool tricks up its sleeve. Practice is key, but it's not that simple. In reality, how you practice is way more important than how often you practice. Enter spaced repetition, the secret sauce to mastering new skills. Spaced repetition is like giving your brain little rest periods between learning sessions. Instead of cramming all your practice into one marathon session, you spread it out over time, letting your brain solidify what you've learned. Think of it like weightlifting for your mind. Just like your muscles need time to recover and grow stronger, your brain needs downtime between practice sessions to absorb and reinforce new information. Here's how it works in practice. Let's say you're learning a new language. Instead of studying vocabulary for 2 hours straight, which, let's be honest, sounds exhausting, you review a few words today, go over them again tomorrow, and then again a few days later. If you're learning a musical instrument, practice a tricky piece for 20 minutes, then come back to it the next day rather than trying to master it all in one sitting. Spaced repetition doesn't just help you remember things, it also strengthens the neural connections that allow you to perform a skill more easily. You're not just cramming short-term information, you're building a long-term foundation. Ever wake up the day after a study session or a practice and suddenly realize you get it now? That's because your brain does some of its best learning while you're sleeping. Yeah, you heard that right. Sleep is like hitting the save button on everything you learned that day. Here's what's happening. While you sleep, your brain replays the things you practiced or studied during the day and starts organizing it into long-term memory. This process is called memory consolidation. It's like your brain is pulling an all-nighter on your behalf. According to neuroscientist Andrew Huberman, who's kind of the expert on this stuff, sleep, especially deep sleep, is when the brain does its heavy lifting. Deep sleep is when your brain strengthens those neural pathways you've been building during the day, making it easier to recall information or perform a skill later. Think of it like building a bridge. You lay down the framework when you're awake, but the real construction happens while you sleep. So next time someone tells you to sleep on it, take it literally. If you've been struggling with a new skill, get some solid rest, and your brain will do some behind-the-scenes magic. So there you have it, the science behind how we learn new skills and some pretty nifty hacks to speed up the process. Understanding how your brain works can make the whole journey feel a lot less overwhelming. The next time you sit down to learn something new, you'll know how to tackle it with science on your side. So keep practicing, keep learning, and most importantly, keep having fun with it. You've got this.